On water many places, and I always like to say that mining, railroads, and ranching are the sexy topics in Colorado history, but water is easily the most important. And I'm happy to see that all of you were involved with the Water Festival. In 1877, John Wesley Powell wrote a paper called Arid Regions of the West. And he said that the history of the American West will be determined by acre-feet of water. And he was right on the nose. Zebulon Pike, exploring out this area 1806 and 7, referred to it as a desert. Stephen Long, out in this area 1819, 1820, referred to the whole area as the Great American Desert. And from that time on, much of the American West, especially the Great Plains, on a map, they had Great American Desert. They didn't have Great Plains on it. In 1877, in his Arid Regions of the West, John Wesley Powell, who understood the American West better than anybody who ever lived before him, and certainly anybody who ever lived after him, made the following points. Number one, he said, there's not plenty more where that came from. We got to protect our water and our land and our lumber. We do not have inexhaustible resources in the West. Secondly, he said much of the land in the American West was not suitable for farming because there wasn't enough water. Number three, he said, if you're going to farm in the American West, you better have access to irrigation. Number four, he said, ranching was the natural way of making a living in the American West. If millions of buffalo could make it for millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years, certainly cattle could use that high grass of the Great Plains and graze very well. Number five, he said, the Homestead Act giving 160 acres of land to anybody who is free, white, male, and 21 in the American West to get people to come into the area didn't work because it would be very difficult to raise one cow in 160 acres in the Great Plains especially. And lastly, Powell said there's only one agency big enough and with enough money to build the irrigation projects and the dams that were needed in the American West, and that was the United States federal government. And John Wesley Powell became known as the father of government bureaus. Bureau of Mines, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Soil Conservation Service, United States Geological Survey, the National Park Service. And he figured if we could use taxpayer money to build gigantic projects with ports out in river and harbor bills in the east, then we damn sure could use money to reclaim western land in the west. Walter Prescott Webb, young professor, University of Texas, 1922, read a book called The Way West by Emerson Hough, in which Emerson Hough said the West had been settled by the rifle, the horse, the axe, and the bow. And Walter Prescott Webb said it might have been settled by the rifle and the horse, but it damn sure wasn't settled by the axe and the bow, because there's no timber in much of the West, especially the Great Plains, and there are no navigable streams in the area around the Rocky Mountains and the Great Plains. And he said anybody using the same techniques in farming that they had used east of the Mississippi River, west of the Mississippi River, was doomed to fail. And he wrote one of the greatest books ever written on the American West, very exciting to read, and I hope some of you people have a chance to read it. And it's simply called The Great Plains, published in 1928, 6 years after he became a prof. Now, when I first came here, we had Walter Prescott Webb coming in here for the summer of '64, and unfortunately, about 2 months before he came, he got hit by a car in Austin, Texas, and killed. So I never got a chance to meet him. Today, Los Angeles has a local water supply capable of supporting 8% of its population. San Diego 10, Denver 20, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Lubbock, and many other western and Colorado cities, a lot less. The state of Colorado averages 11 inches of rain a year, often overlooked because of the enormous amount of snowfall and runoff that we usually have, we didn't this year, every year. The western slope of Colorado, the western 1/3, has 33% of the land area in the state, 70% of the water, and 10% of the population, leading to the famous expression, the water is where the people ain't, and the people ain't where the water is. And therein lie many tales of woe. Such expressions as, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. The South Platte River, too thick to drink, too thin to plow. Water is the most cussed and discussed topic in the West. And ex-Governor John Love, water runs uphill towards money. 40 million people in 7 western states rely on Colorado River water, and the same depend on it for electricity. There are 10 dams and 80 diversions on the Colorado River, which no longer makes it to the Gulf of California and the Pacific Ocean. Early irrigation in Colorado. Mesa Verde Indians, 1 to 1,300. Very sophisticated irrigation. Left in 1299 after a 27-year drought. Early Mexican villages in the San Luis Valley and south of the Arkansas River. The Mexican people were very sophisticated in their irrigation and knew what they were doing. The Anglos were too stupid to realize that they knew more than the Anglos did. And irrigation really wasn't accepted until a guy named David Wall irrigated 2 acres of land near Golden. Crops were tremendous, and he sold them at a great profit to all the mining camps up Clear Creek Canyon. Central City, Georgetown, Silver Plume, Nevadaville, and Black Hawk. With more and more water being taken out of streams, a man by the name of Nathan Meeker came in 1870 to start the Union Colony right where Greeley is today. And it became Greeley because his editor, the New York Tribune, who sent him to the West, was Horace Greeley, who said, "Go west, young man." When Nathan Meeker started the Union Colony, he now had more people to dig irrigation ditches and even canals. And now water was brought farther away from the stream. Irrigation is hard work. And if you're just one family, you're not going to be able to run ditches very far away from the stream bed. But now with a lot of people, you dug canals. And water went on to bench lands, and more was used. And as more and more water was used, we quickly found out that, especially later in the year, there wasn't enough water for irrigation. That led to pumping of water from underground aquifers, the most famous of which is the Ogallala Aquifer, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and eastern Colorado, part of Texas. And that aquifer covers 174,000 square miles and contains as much water as Lake Huron. The windmill, taking advantage of prairie winds, which average 10 to 12 miles an hour, made the pumping possible. Later on, gas-powered pumps allowed for more water to be pumped from the aquifer, leading to over $20 billion of food being produced. Unfortunately, as time went on, aquifers began to get depleted, and the water table dropped alarmingly. Aquifers in eastern Colorado and the Great Plains shrank twice as fast from 2011 to 2016 as they did in the previous 60 years. And once an aquifer is depleted, it takes a long time to recharge it. In 1900, the Uncompahgre Valley on Colorado's western slope, Ridgway, Montrose, Pea Green, Olathe, Delta, was running out of water. More and more people had moved in. And a lot of people were now starting to leave, ranchers and farmers. Temptingly, not far away, the Gunnison River roared through the Black Canyon, and people in the Uncompahgre dreamed of a day when you might be able to get that water into the Uncompahgre Valley, but that appeared to be a pipe dream because separating the Gunnison River and the Black Canyon and the Uncompahgre Valley was high, vernal mesa. In the year 1894, a rancher named Frank Lazan took readings of the Gunnison River in the Black Canyon and the Uncompahgre Valley, and he found that the Gunnison River in the canyon was higher than the Uncompahgre Valley, which meant that if a tunnel was ever able to be dug below the vernal mesa, the water could run by gravity in the Uncompahgre Valley. If the valley was higher, it probably wouldn't have been possible. And as a result, 175,000 irrigable acres in the Uncompahgre Valley, only 35,000 acres could be irrigated by the Uncompahgre River. In 1901, the newly formed Bureau of Reclamation decided that a tunnel might be built. And they sent two great men in, and this is a fantastic story, much longer than I have time for today, named Abraham Lincoln Fellows and William Torrance into the Black Canyon to see if they could find a tunnel site, which they did. And starting in 1904, the Bureau of Reclamation began building the Gunnison Tunnel, with workers working from Luani, or West Portal, 8 miles outside of Montrose, and River Portal, or East Portal, in the Black Canyon after they diverted the Gunnison River so they could build. In 1909, they came together in the middle of the tunnel, 11/100ths of an inch off. And William Howard Taft, the President of the United States, came here on September 23rd, 1909, at Luani. And he threw the switch to start the first water flowing. And that was the first great Bureau of Reclamation project in the history of the United States. And Montrose and Ridgway and Pea Green and Olathe were saved. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist today. With more and more people coming into Denver and the Front Range after World War I, the Bureau of Reclamation decided it was time to divert water from the western slope of Colorado, where the water was, to the eastern slope where they needed it. And this led to the Moffett Tunnel, taking water out of the Fraser River on the western slope, taking it on a 6-mile underground tunnel which parallels Amtrak. The railroad and water tunnel run parallel to each other, and dumping it into an area that provided water for Denver. That was built by the year 1937. And now came the granddaddy of them all, and this one began in 1937, ended in 1953 with World War II intervening, and this is the famous Colorado Big Thompson project, which took water out of the Colorado River on the western slope near Grand Lake, ran it through a 23-mile underground tunnel underneath Rocky Mountain National Park, brought it out into Estes Park and Lake Estes, and then the water flowed down the Big Thompson River to provide irrigation for Loveland and Windsor and all the towns on the eastern slope. That project cost $160 million. And of all of the water diverted from the west slope to the east slope, 500,000 acre feet a year, 310,000 comes from the Colorado Big Thompson project. So take all the other diversions together, and there are 38 of them. The other 37 don't equal the water taken out in the Colorado Big T project. And incidentally, an acre-foot of water is 1 foot of water covering 1 acre of land. The Roberts Tunnel was another trans-mountain water diversion. That one was built from 1958 to 62, damming up the Blue River, creating Lake Dillon, with the construction camp being Silver Thorn. And from there, a 23-mile long underground tunnel was built, and water was taken to a branch of the South Platte River near Grant on Highway 285, dumped into the North Fork of the South Platte River. So when you go by Grant today, look on the left side of the road going towards Denver, there's a big white water tunnel, and that's where the water comes out. One more diversion, and that was the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, built from 1962 to 74. That one took water from the Frying Pan River near Basalt on the western slope, created the Rudai Reservoir for people on the western slope, ran a 6-mile-long Boosted Tunnel under the divide and Hagerman Pass, dumping it into Turquoise Lake near Leadville, and then down the Arkansas River all the way to Pueblo, and that water created the Pueblo Dam in 1975. There are 38 trans-mountain water diversions in Colorado from the west slope to the east slope, diverting 500,000 acre-feet of water every year. Water was the lifeblood of Colorado and the West, and everybody wanted it and everybody knew they needed it. And this led to litigation. The West wasn't smart enough to do something else. The first case was Kansas versus Colorado. Went before the Supreme Court in 1901, wasn't decided till 1907. Kansas used the doctrine of riparian water rights. And the doctrine of riparian water rights says that you can use any amount of water as it goes by your property, with two exceptions. You can't take so much out that you stop mill wheels from operating, and you can't take so much out that you stop steamboats from operating. And I would submit to you that we're talking about rivers that big with that much water. Nobody's worried too much about taking a little water as it goes by your property. That did not work in the American West. And in the American West, we have the doctrine of prior appropriation, sometimes called the California or Colorado doctrine. And that has two rules to it. Number one is first in time, first in use. Whoever files the first water right on the river is going to be the last one to go dry in a dry year. Whoever has the early water rights got the advantage. And secondly, use it or lose it. Nobody can afford to hoard water in the West. If you can't prove that you can use it, you've got to give it up to somebody who can use it. Now, all this is complicated, and I'm going to shorten things up a little bit. Kansas said that Colorado was taking so much water from the Arkansas River that when it got into Kansas, Kansas farmers didn't have water later in the year. Colorado said we have the doctrine of international law, which said that whatever state, wherever rivers headed, in whatever state, that state controlled the rivers. Well, that's fantastic for Colorado, right? Because the Arkansas River, the Colorado River, the South Platte River, all head in Colorado. Supreme Court ruled against Kansas because Kansas was taking water out of the river and denying Oklahoma farmers downstream the same damn thing they were accusing Colorado of doing. So Colorado won the case. But as they celebrated, one guy was smart enough to look at the Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court had used the term equitable apportionment, which meant that Colorado's international law doctrine was a bunch of crap. No matter where the water headed, where the river's headed, everybody would be entitled to an equitable apportionment of the river as it went through their territory. Now, the court didn't say who was going to get what. That was left for later on. So the people of Colorado in the West looked at it. This one took 6 years, cost a lot of money, made a lot of water lawyers rich, and nobody got what they wanted. You'd think that the West would have learned, but they didn't learn yet. It was going to take one more court case, and that one came in 1911, and that one was Wyoming versus Colorado. Now, this involved two states that had the same water doctrine, unlike Kansas versus Colorado. Both Wyoming and Colorado used the doctrine of prior appropriation. What the people of the Poudre Valley, where Fort Collins is today, wanted to do was divert water from the Laramie River Basin to the west underneath the Medicine Bow Mountains and dump it into the Poudre Valley where more and more people were moving in. And Wyoming sued Colorado. Now the big point here was, could you take water out of one basin and move it into another? Because if you were able to do that, that would deny what was known as return flow. 50% of all irrigation water finds its way back into the stream, but not if you take it out of the basin. And the Supreme Court said in 1922, you could take water from one basin and move it into another basin if you had the water rights. And because people had moved into the Laramie River Valley of Wyoming before Colorado, in the Poudre Valley, all Colorado had the right to was 15,500 acre-feet of water from the Laramie River, and that wasn't enough to build the tunnel. So, case took 11 years, cost more money, more water lawyers got rich, nobody got what they wanted. And now all of the states in the West were very afraid for a couple of reasons. Number one, the federal government was claiming that they had the right to all unappropriated water in the West's unnavigable streams. And number two, the federal government was telling the states of the West they were going to build the Boulder Dam, today known as the Hoover Dam, which now backs up Lake Mead. And that got the West's attention. And as a result, in the hot summer in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1922, the Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, 7 years later President of the U.S., as the chief man narrating, 7 states on the Colorado River and its tributaries got together. And they ultimately would sign the most famous water compact in the world, studied all over the world, called the Colorado River Compact. And Colorado was very lucky to have one of the top water lawyers in the nation, Delph Carpenter from Greeley, as our representative. The other states had politicians and people who didn't know as much about water as Carpenter did. Delph Carpenter was alarmed at the fast growth going on in Southern California. And under the doctrine of prior appropriation, with that population increase, they could take the water because they could prove they could use it, and we out here in the Rocky Mountains couldn't prove that we could use it. And as a result, Delph Carpenter demanded that the Colorado River Compact give upper basin states on the river a share of its flow, regardless of whether the states had put it to beneficial use or not. And the most important thing I'm telling you here this evening is that was a giant end around the doctrine of prior appropriation. Because in the River Compact, which is the law of the river, everybody in the upper basin is entitled to a certain amount of the water, and doesn't make a damn bit of difference what the doctrine of prior appropriation says. Here are the provisions of the Colorado River Compact. Number one, the 7 states on the Colorado River and tributaries would be divided into upper and lower basin, with the dividing line at a place where a Mormon missionary named John Lee used to ferry people across the Colorado River, today known as Lee's Ferry, Page, Arizona, or the site of the Glen Canyon Dam. Anything above that, upper basin. Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, where the Colorado River and the tributaries headed. Anything below that, where the rivers wound up, Nevada, California, and Arizona, those are lower basin states. It was assumed that the Colorado River produced 20 million acre-feet of water a year. Now, there's a great book on this by Norris Huntley called Water in the West, and the guys that did the Colorado River Compact knew that that wasn't true. But politics now got in the way. Number 3, the length of the contract would be in perpetuity. Delph Carpenter wanted this to last forever, with no other states, no legislatures, no Congress, no president ever having the chance to change it. So he didn't want to say we're going to do this for 25 years and then take a look at it. And that was a brilliant move on Carpenter's part. Number 4, the Upper Basin states agreed to allow an average of 7.5 million acre-feet of water to go by Lee's Ferry to the Lower Basin states every year. Now, they actually agreed to 75 million every 10 years. So the Lower Basin can call for more in one year, but then they got to make it up in the next year. Average of 7.5. We have found out since 1922 in the compact that the Colorado River produces 14 million acre-feet of water, not 20, which means the Upper Basin states got screwed, because we had to let 7.5 million go downstream, and the only thing that was left was 6.5 million for us. Number 5, any excess water would go to the area of greatest need. Nobody, ladies and gentlemen, could ever foresee that there would be 5 million people living in the Phoenix area and 1.5 million in Las Vegas, and there wouldn't, except for an invention called air conditioning. There wouldn't be 9 guys named Claude living in Phoenix without it, and no more than 6 in Las Vegas. But obviously that's where the population has gone. There's no excess water, so it doesn't make any difference. Number 6, navigation and power are secondary to domestic and agricultural use. And lastly, Mexico would get 1.5 million acre-feet of water, because they're on the Colorado River also, taken equally from the upper and lower basin allotments. So the upper basin's got to give us 750,000, and so does the lower basin. The upper basin obviously has been hurt because the area of greatest need has been in those Southern California, Arizona, Nevada areas. The Colorado River today is the most important river in the U.S., even though it's only 6th in acre-feet of water. And it's the most important because it's the only real source of water and electricity in the Southwest. In the Upper Basin River Act of 1948, the Upper Basin states decided amongst themselves who would get Colorado River water. Colorado, 51.75% of the Upper Basin allotment. Utah, 23%. Wyoming, 14%. New Mexico, 11%. And one more thing. In Winters versus the United States, Supreme Court case of 1908, the Supreme Court ruled that Native Americans had water rights on their reservations. Just because the Colorado River Compact ignored that didn't mean they didn't have them, and they still have them today. In the 1950s, it became obvious that there was a great need for storage of water in the Upper Basin states, so we could hold the water to when the Lower Basin states needed the water later in the year. And the Upper Basin also wanted storage for itself. The head of the House Interior and Insular Affairs Committee at that time was Wayne Aspinall of Palisade, Colorado. His family had moved to Palisade in 1896 and raised fruit. Now, Wayne Aspinall came to our water workshops for 4 or 5 years in a row and became a great friend of mine. I had a lot of correspondence of him. We spent a lot of time together. And the head of the Denver Water Board, Glenn Saunders, told me one time that Wayne Aspinall, when he had experts testifying in his committee, knew more than the experts. And to give you an idea how Aspinall ran his committee, one day a fellow Democrat named Phil Burton from California was reportedly said something in the paper to the extent that Wayne Aspinall runs his committee so tightly that you got to raise your hand to go to the bathroom, which was true. 8 o'clock the next morning, Phil Burton got a phone call from Wayne Aspinall. So I'd like to have you in my office ASAP. Burton came in. Wayne said, "Phil, is this true, this report in the paper true?" And Phil Burton said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, it is. I was kind of joking." And Wayne Aspinall said, "Phil, you got a river and harbor bill that's up for a vote in San Diego in your district, don't you?" And Phil Burton said, "Mr. Chairman, I do." And Wayne Aspinall said, "Do I make myself clear? There won't be any more damn nonsense about this in the newspapers if you want to get that river and harbor bill." And thus came the Upper Colorado River Storage Act of 1956, which created 6 dams in the upper basin states to hold the water when the lower basin needed them. 3 are on the Gunnison River: Blue Mesa, Morro Point, and Crystal. 1 is the Navajo Dam near Farmington, New Mexico. 1 is Flaming Gorge on the Green River, southern Wyoming, and 1 is the Glen Canyon Dam at Page, Arizona. We also got some participating projects on the western slope. Paonia Reservoir is 1. Ridgeway Reservoir ultimately is 2. Crawford Reservoir is 3. The water situation in Colorado and the West today in 2021 is dire. Capital D, capital I, capital R, capital E. Colorado River is way over appropriated. There is not enough water to support the 40 million people who depend on it. Mountain snowpack in the West has declined 15% in the last 20 years. Colorado River flows are down 20% along with the depletion of aquifers. Fights over Colorado River water in the West and in Colorado will involve industry, agriculture, recreation, cities, environmentalists, power companies, the federal government, and land developers. We have to accept that we live in a high arid area, and we only have a limited amount of water. And the day is fast approaching. And I might even still be around. I never thought that I would. When I will tell my students about the great eastward movement. And my students will say, "Now, Vandenbusche, you get a little older, you're losing it. You mean the great westward movement?" No, no, no. Because people are going to have to move out of the West and back to the East where there's enough water. They're going to have to go to Illinois and Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio. In 1980, ex-President Gerald Ford, just been out of office 3 years, came to Mountaineer Bowl to honor Wayne Aspinall. And President Ford made one sentence that I never forgot. He said that they say that education costs a lot, but ignorance costs a lot more. And that's what we have in the West. The only thing that stops growth and more population is economics. When somebody wants to build a home in Crested Butte or at Highlands Ranch or in Montrose, before they build that home, they're going to come and see the water commissioner or the head of the water. And it's going to be my sad duty to tell them that water rates will be $20,000 a month. Now, when that happens, I can guarantee you there'll be a lot less building. Everybody would like to live in Aspen or Crested Butte or Breckenridge, but the price of a home is $2.5 million, and I can't afford to live there. And the same thing is going to happen with water. the western slope where the water is, and the eastern slope where the water is wanted will continue to fight each other. And western Colorado believes that in any negotiation with the Front Range and Denver, we know that they believed in their negotiations that, quote, what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. In a court case of about 10 years ago, Audubon Society versus Los Angeles, the Supreme Court ruled that in the public trust doctrine, and the public trust doctrine says that streams have rights. The public has rights regarding streams in contradiction to the doctrine of prior appropriation, and nobody knows where that's going to go. The major problem involving water, however, may be climate change. The National Research Council recently said that the Earth is the hottest it has been in 400 years. It declared, and I'm quoting, climate change and soaring population across the Southwest threatens to overwhelm the main water source for millions. The Colorado Basin is going to face costly, controversial, and unavoidable trade-off choices, along with demands threatening the area's ability to cope with droughts and water shortages. Now, a couple of concluding comments. I just took this out of the paper the other day. Lake Mead right now is the lowest it's been since it was filled for the first time, since they built it in 1937. 70% of the water from 7 states is used for agriculture in the Colorado River. This year, 2021, and in the last 22 years, have been one of the driest in centuries. In 2000, Lake Mead was full. In 2021, it is 143 feet down. So far down, they might not even be able to provide electricity. The last 12 months have been the driest 12 months in 126 years of records. The West is now what we call a red alert. 2 ways of alleviating the crisis. One is, it's been discussed, building a desalination plant on the shore of the Sea of Cortez, and then trading with Mexico for its Colorado River water. Desalination plants are very expensive, and the technology isn't quite there yet today. Another way is through recycling of water. But as one water expert said, the West today is a house on fire, and we're still rearranging the furniture and deciding how to redecorate the kitchen. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a sobering view of what the situation in Colorado in our own neck of the woods is today and in the American West. And I'm sorry I can't be a little more optimistic. But every day I get up looking for one lousy cloud and can't find it. Any questions anybody has, be happy to answer. If not, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. So I couldn't be more optimistic.